Tam. Ladies? So, sarva, all, kama, desires, dugam, yielding, divyam, wonderful, sarvaratna, all sorts of jewels, samanvitam, bedecked with, sarva, all, riddhi, of wealth, upachaya, increase, udarkam, gradual, mani, of precious stones, stambhai, with pillars, upaskritam, adorned. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada. It was a wonderful structure, bedecked with all sorts of jewels, adorned with pillars of precious stones, and capable of yielding whatever one desired. It was equipped with every form of furniture and wealth, which tended to increase in the course of time. Purport. The castle created in the sky by Kardama Muni may be called, quote, a castle in the air, unquote. But by his mystic power of yoga, Kardama Muni actually constructed a huge castle in the air. To our feeble imagination, a castle in the sky is an impossibility. But if we scrutinizingly consider the matter, we can understand that it is not impossible at all. If the Supreme Personality of Godhead can create so many planets, carrying millions of castles in the air, a perfect yogi like Kardama Muni can easily construct one castle in the air. The castle is described as sarva kama dugham, yielding whatever one desired. It was full of jewels. Even the pillars were made of pearls and valuable stones. These valuable jewels and stones were not subject to deterioration, but were everlastingly and increasingly opulent. We sometimes hear of castles thus bedecked on the surface of this earth also. The castles constructed by Lord Krishna for his 16,108 wives were so bedecked with jewels that there was no need of lamplight during the night. Om Aginatam Randasya Kinanjana Sharkaya Chakshunaritam Devatasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Hare Krishna. So, I'll be honest that when I learned I was to give this talk and I read this purport and I thought, what am I going to talk about? Castles and... But by the grace of, Adikarta, to begin with, I asked him for some advice. He gave a few hints. But anyway, the wheel started turning in my brain, and different things came up. But the first that kind of struck me was Prabhupada's use of the term feeble imagination. And I have to admit again that I also identify with that. That very often when I am confronted with these narrations of castles and jewels and so on, my immediate feeble imaginative brain thinks, what is going on here? Castles in the sky and jewels that emanate, just things that are beyond my experience, right? And I have difficulty imagining them. This morning, though, somehow in that mood, I began thinking about something that I do experience, which is equally, if not more, difficult to imagine, and that is how all of the bodies that we occupy today arose from this tiny string called the genome, and actually two, one in the sperm of the male and one in the egg, that these two DNAs combined together, these tiny, you can hardly see them in a microscope, they combine together, and the information that is coded in that string, which now I just now, a few minutes ago, looked up, there's something called the Human Genome Project, which is trying to map this string of information. And it says there's 3 billion pairs. Because if you have studied or know a little bit about DNA, it's composed of pairs of proteins. Each, I don't know how many proteins there are. There's 23 chromosomes.
Proteins altogether.
Yeah. So this alphabet. And somehow or other, this combination of atoms and molecules has a program, a software program that when it is initiated and it is turned on by this combination, just goes to work, and within 9 months, there's a baby. I mean, to my feeble imagination, it's like miraculous. So, okay. If an ordinary human being, this is what Prabhupada is kind of referring to. If we look at different scales, he goes to the top and it says, Krishna can create planets and castles and innumerable. So what to speak of? A yogi can make one castle? And you and I, without even much effort, can make the arrangement that a baby is produced. Now, it's stated here that Kardama Muni did this by his yogic power. And you, yesterday, Adikarta, you spoke a bit about the cities. So that's another thing that has been difficult for my feeble imagination, to understand how someone has, Where does that come from? I mean, we can understand, sometimes we see people appear, just extraordinarily powerful in this world because they can run, the marathon in so short time, and we can hardly go up and down the stairs. But making yourself smaller than the smallest, and here, creating a castle in the sky. So I've, from time to time, I've tried to understand, well, how does this happen? Now, how does a yogi, how do they obtain such power? First question, where does this power come from? Now, I don't know if you mentioned it yesterday, but these yogic cities are especially mentioned in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, out of the practice of Ashtanga Yoga. And they arise when? This is what I read today, and I'm not quoting this or claiming this to be authoritative because it's not from Srila Prabhupada. It's more from people who have looked at the Yoga Sutras. But their claim is that when dharana, because the last three levels of Ashtanga Yoga are dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. And together they're called samayan. That these three together, which produce intense control of the mind. I mean, at least my experience is that to control the mental body, which is a very active one in my case, for even a minute is difficult. And the yogi, it was described, I think, in a previous purport, that Kardama had been practicing this yoga for how long? 10,000 years. For 10,000 years. He had developed the capacity, of course, he started off as Kardama Muni, so I mean, that's another aspect of this, is a different age, different time, etc. But we hear about today even of yogis who, over years and years of practice, decades of practice, intense practice, using all of the limbs of the Ashtanga Yoga, of course, beginning with yama and niyama, and then going into the asanas and pranayama and pratyahara, they achieve these dharana and dhyana and samadhi. They are able to enter into a state of mental control in which they have absolute focus. And apparently, according to these sutras, what I've heard is that whatever they focus on, they're able to achieve the power of that thing. So, for example, if they focus on a person, they can achieve the telepathy. They can. One of the articles I read that was talking about this described it as similar to the Vulcan mind meld of the, was it Star Trek or whatever? That how with intense concentration one can become another person, more or less, and experience that. So similarly, the yogis, with their concentration, just in the case of Kardama Muni, you could begin to then imagine, at least I could begin to imagine, that through his concentration on the elements that make up a castle in the sky, by concentrating on those, he's able to actually bring them into focus. Because what are these elements? What are these things? they're combinations of material elements in a certain way. So by his ability to intensely focus, he can bring this into existence. So one feeble imagination of mine began to get a little bit less difficult. Oh yeah, okay. He's a yogi. He can do this. But then I started having trouble with the gems. Gems that light up. And because, have you ever, I don't have any, but my wife has a few, I've never seen, have you ever seen in a dark room that a gem emits light? I haven't. So I started to think, well, how does that work? How is it? So maybe I was thinking, well, okay, they reflect, they kind of catch the stray light and they intensify it. So I looked it up, and there are gems which are phosphorescent. They have self-illuminating power. They emit light. So here we are. The light, the gems, the jewels that were created in this wonderful structure had the power of emitting light. And they also, according to this, and this now my imagination is starting to become a little less feeble, and I'm able to then appreciate that the last part of this is that not only are they, a castle in the sky, castle in the air, emitting light and so on, but they're increasing. So that came to be a thought about the nature of these creations. That this Kardama Muni is creating something. First of all, he has the capacity to create it through mystic power. So certainly he has also imbued those elements with a capacity to increase, to grow. He more or less gave life to his castle. So all of this comes within the purview that you were describing yesterday of the power of yoga, the power of mind over matter. That one who can develop such powerful control over the substance we call mind, and it is a substance, it is an element of this world. We don't have much, we basically observe it, and we do use it. We use our minds, hopefully, to think about things and to concentrate on things. Of course, we use our minds because they're the central repository of our sensual perception, so we use the mind to receive information. But more or less, we just go along with it. We don't have, if we can somehow get our minds to simply be engaged in devotional service, then that's an achievement. And that we do by surrendering our mind, surrendering our faculties, giving them over to Krishna's service. And he then takes control. But to personally actually have that kind of connection with one's subtle body, to be able to use it in order to manipulate the gross world, that is far beyond, at least, my ability, and neither is it something that we aspire for. What would be the use? Of course, Kardama made good use of this in order to satisfy Devahuti so that she could have and bring forth Kapila Dev. Not for his own sake. For his own sake, he didn't care. He was happy living in a simple hut. And it's described in the earlier verses how Devahuti was was able to live like that. But she needed to have fulfillment of her nature as a woman and have a child. And for that purpose, she thought, this is, in this condition, how can we bring forth the best in progeny? And so appealed to, because she, and it's all described in the earlier verses, how she, her rationale. And she didn't ask for it, but Kardama understood and responded with this aerial palace. Another thought I was having about, trying to think of what to talk about in respect of palaces and so on, I began to think also about Krishna, because Prabhupada talks about Krishna's palaces and how Krishna manifested, or he arranged that, of course, he did not bring them forth out of his mind. He could have. But he arranged, I think, isn't it Vishwakarma who came down and built the Dwarka? I know Vishwakarma had some, he built these Nava Vrindavan in Dwarka. He built that, this Vrindavan garden, the original new Vrindavan was there in Dwarka. And there's a whole pastime in, was it Lalita Madhava, I think? Yeah, Lalita Madhava, where this is all described. But that's not his preferred form of palatial accommodation. Krishna's favorite form of palace is not constructed of gems and pearls. It's not constructed of bricks and stone and marble, but it is the kunj. His favorite palatial space, is that created by Vrindadevi. And I recalled in a previous, when we were talking about Vrinda, a description that is in the another, actually I think it's Jiva Goswami, who wrote a play called Madhav Mahotsav, which follows on some parts of the, I think, Vidagdha Madhava, in which Srimati Radharani is crowned as the queen of Vrindavan. And for this purpose, Vrindadevi creates a palace. But her creation is not arisen out of yogic manifestation. She doesn't sit down in meditation and then out of her powers of yoga, some amazing creation appears. She orders the plants, the creepers, the trees of Braj to come together and make this kunj. And they do so in such beauty and such splendor that it surpasses the beauty of the pearls and stone columns of Kardama's palace. To begin with, they're fully alive. There's some life in Kardama's palace that's growing, something's going on, but they emit some light, they do something. But these trees and creepers of Vrindavan, they're fully alive and responsive. and able to interact with the divine couple in that kunj. So I was thinking of like that also, that how the difference between the creations of the yogis, how they can manipulate and they create, but the connection is not bhakti. It's an arrangement. It's a beautiful arrangement. Kardama's palace in the air, I'm sure, is beyond anything that at least I can imagine. But still, it pales in respect of Sri Krishna's Vrindavan kunjas. That's where he enjoys most. So we have such a wonderful opportunity to join this procession of devotion that is marching down the path of bhakti towards such a wonderful abode. When I started, we have a few more minutes just to touch upon another topic, because this morning when I was discussing what do I talk about? Then again, well, it's about buildings, right? So where do building, our relationship with buildings, and here we are, we're in a building. And we've had a lot of talk about buildings recently. Here we are in this particular building, which, from what I mean, maybe some of you can see pillars of gems. I mean, Sri Krishna can make whatever he likes. But to our perception, it needs a little maintenance. It's not self-effulgent. So, and we, what is our relationship with these buildings, and how do buildings fit into our movement? Sometimes devotees talk about, everything's about the building. What about the people? And so sometimes there's some concern. Well, we're too much engaged in buildings, and we're neglecting the devotees, perhaps. Buildings have had an interesting history in our movement. We know that the Goswamis personally lived under trees or cottages or kutirs. They had very, very simplest type of accommodation was, if any. We hear about, I think it was Raghunath, right? Who, when he came to reside in Vrindavan, he would live just in the open. And at one point, in the hot sun, it was observed that a beautiful lady came and gave shade. And I'm not sure if it was Rupa or someone. Rupa, I think, somehow observed this from a distance and could recognize that this was Sri Radha herself, and scolded him for taking service from Sri Radha. And then he built some shelter. So not to disturb. Yes. And that was the origin of having a bhajan kutir. But what was it? It must have been just a few sticks and some leaves and just some shade, some shelter, something to protect yourself a little bit from the elements, not to disturb Srimati Radharani. Of course, that's the Goswamis. But then when the opportunity came, they also had deities. And I think it was Sanatan, he would take Madan Mohan, and put him in a little bag and hang him on a tree, from a tree. And what to speak of feeding him. There was that story about how he would feed some dried chapati, and Madan would talk to him and said, "With a little salt?" And he responded, "Well, now you want salt, next you want this, next you want that. What am I going to do? Here I am." So this was the mood of those Goswamis. But then when the opportunity arose, someone came for doing service, and okay, now you can do that service. You're the wealthy, you have all this wealth. You're in that position of being a Vaishya or king, or you have all of this opulence. And engage those persons in service to the deity, to create a beautiful facility. So this was also Srila Prabhupada's methodology. For himself, he didn't need anything. He could live, and he did. From the history of New York, we know where and how Srila Prabhupada lived in this city. He was willing to live under the most austere circumstances that many of us would have very great difficulty. But for the service of Krishna consciousness, for the service of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Prabhupada, he accepted all of this. But he envisioned, there's a famous story of him sitting on a bench in Central Park or something, and a gentleman sits down, strikes up a conversation, and Prabhupada responds. He's asked what he's doing, and how somehow the conversation, he says, there are temples, there are books, there are many members, just time is separating. So he had a vision. But he was also concerned about buildings, because he recalled the history of the Gaudiya Math. There was and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's concerns. I'm told that there's a song that is, I'm told, was composed by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur at the time that they were moving the deities of Gandharvika Giridhari from Ultadanga Road to Bagh Bazar Gaudiya Math. So now you have all, some of you have you visited Ultadanga Road? You were there. Okay, we were there, Atita and I. You must go. You must go. If you go to India, you must visit number 1 Ultadanga Road. It's like walking back in time. They've restored the building where our ISKCON, you could say, was born first at number 1 Ultadanga Road, when Srila Prabhupada went onto the roof there, which you can go on to, and sat with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and received the order to take this movement to the Western world. So when you walk through those halls, you see how simple it was. Still is. I mean, they've restored it, and it's still quite simple. It's I think it's just a one-story building with a roof, a little courtyard in the middle. And it was packed. It was packed with devotees. like we were packed, right? In Henry Street and 55th Street, we were packed up, packed with devotees, fully engaged. Down the road, there was the printing press. They were completely engaged in Sankirtan and book distribution. And similar to Rupa and Sanata and so on, a wealthy supporter gave the land in Bagh Bazar, arranged the funds. I discovered when I visited a few years ago that the marble was produced by Pancaratna. Yes, the company was Pancaratna something or other. So I've always wondered what, and I thought that today is appropriate. This verse was about Ratnas, So anyway, so Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta composed this is apparently composed here. Mattala Harijana Vishaya Range Pujala Ragapata Gaurava Bhange. So these first two lines are translated that the servants of Hari, says Mattala Harijana, Mattala Harijana, on their head, the Harijana, the servants of Hari, Vishaya Range, engaged in lavish affairs, handling material wealth, engaging all manners of things in the Lord's service. They worship the path of Pujala Ragapata Gaurava Bhange. They worship the Ragapata Gaurava Bhange with the mood of awe and reverence. They keep the Ragapata on their head. So he was commenting that, okay, here we are. The purport, as I've understood it, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati is considering, here we are, we've had simple arrangements, but now we're using what to externally appears to be Vishaya Range, the opulence of the world, but we're using it for the service of Krishna, and we're keeping the path of spontaneous love on our heads, and with great awe and reverence we proceed. But we know from Srila Prabhupada that things didn't work out so well in that building. According to his comments to us, at some point towards the end of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's presence, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur observed that the devotees, they lost that to some extent, and they were fighting, he says, fighting over the rooms. Who would be in here? Who would be in there? And in fact, to the extent that we hear that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta told Srila Prabhupada that he would consider simply let's sell the marble and print books. That was the extent to which he looked at it. So we can see some dangers there in buildings as well. We use buildings. We need buildings. Prabhupada in Mayapur, he was living in the Bhajan Kutir there. And he said that he was very happy. The other devotees perhaps were a little, disturbed by the austerity. But he said, I'm very happy in this place. But who will come? Who will come to experience Mayapur in this simple place? Therefore, we must build suitable facilities to attract others. And that was his mood of building the temple, Sri Mayapur Chandradoya Mandir, the temple of the Vedic planetarium, to attract the world to come through the architecture. So similarly, here we are in New York. We have an opportunity to make a temple. We have a temple, it's already nice. We can make it nicer and nicer, more and more attractive, more and more facility, For what purpose? Not for enjoyment, not that we can then enjoy having a nice building, but so that we can attract others and we can engage in our service, pujala, ragapata, gaurava bhange. We can serve the path of bhakti and bringing others onto that path. That mood, we should approach our development here, keeping our purpose. There's even in architecture, they have that saying that form follows function. So our function, our purpose, our business. The purpose of Kardama Muni and Devahuti was a little different. He was trying to create a place that would produce the right circumstances for a child, a special child. But our purpose here is to produce the right circumstances, the right environment to produce another kind of progeny, another offspring, the awakening, the birth of bhakti in the hearts of all that step in. So, somehow or other, I found something to talk about related to buildings and so on, and I hope that it was okay. So, we'll stop here, have a few minutes for comments or questions. Hare Krishna. Any?
There's a quite elaborate description of the mystic powers of yoga in 11th canto, 15th chapter, where Krishna explains them, actually.
Yes, you mentioned that. Yeah.
That's, the process is through the process of mental control, one can actually harness the various energies and properties which cause things to manifest in the material world.
Yes.
So we know that in general, that the material elements, they all come from the Akash, and especially sound generates things. So that's how Brahma and the demigods, they don't actually build things, that they actually know the right mantras and the right mentality, and through organizing in the right way, things automatically generate. They don't even have to attend to all the details,
Yeah.
But when we create something, we have to get all the requisite parts, we have to think of the structure, we have to assemble it in the right configuration, also in the right order, because sometimes, some things are inside of other things, so you have to generate them first before you generate the outer side, and et cetera, so it's all very elaborate.
I was thinking about what you just mentioned, also in relationship to the first example I gave of the DNA coming together,
Mm-hmm.
and then automatically through that seed information, by planting the information, because the information is there, the information content has been, the code, the formula has been constructed, and then that formula actually gives rise on its own. So I was thinking that, like you just said, that the yogis and so on, they know the formulas, they know the combination, they have these special keys that simply by turning that key in a certain way, by mental control, they've learned. I don't know if you, I once had the question, because in the Bhāgavatam we have all this cosmology. And I said, what's this, who's this for? I mean, we're generally not aspiring to visit all of those places. But I thought, well, this is also, it's kind of a yogi's map, it's, yogis somehow, I think, are able to use all of that information to do whatever they have to do. But anyway, it's beyond my feeble imagination.
It just shows that we are part of a much larger system.
Yes.
That what we see and what we actually encounter is only a fragment of even the material world, what to speak of other domains, the spiritual world, etc. And depending on your purity as to what degree you're able to grasp and even perceive these larger systems. And so yogis can explain about how Bhumandala works because they can actually visualize it and move in it.
Yes.
Whereas, we rely on accounts,
Right.
because we can't actually visualize and move around in it. And people who are even more ensconced in the material energy can see even less than we do of what's going on around them. They're even less aware. And so this material energy works in a very, also almost comical, very elaborate and detailed way. I'm always reminded that in my youth, I used to see these cartoons that were done by a cartoonist named Rube Goldberg. I don't know if you've ever seen a Rube Goldberg machine where it has these ridiculous machines where, you start by pushing a marble, it rolls down a thing, and then it pushes a spring, it fires the marble up, and it falls in some water. The water leaks out over the side. That does something else. It's all these kind of ridiculous, one thing causes something else to cause and something else. And it's all ridiculous things, like finally a cage opens, a bird flies out, the cat runs after the bird, but the cat's got something tied to its tail. And, and that's actually the way the material world works.
And the end result is...
The end result is a letter drops into a post office box, something that you could have done very easily, But the reason I bring up these Rube Goldberg machines is actually the material energy does work like that, if you read about, for instance, the blood clotting cascade, there's something like 20 steps that have to all take place before the blood clots when you cut your finger, one thing is, sets something up, something else becomes a, enzyme, something else cleaves some other part, there's a signaling, protein, and it does something else. And so this myriad, these tiny structures working on one another does something as simple as just clot your blood. But, if it didn't happen in the right order, and it didn't happen at the right time, it would be deadly. If your blood clotted while it was inside your veins, you'd be dead immediately. Similarly, if your blood didn't clot when you got a cut, then you would bleed to death from anything. So the material world works in these kind of cascades of things. However, there is a deeper level, the level that the yogis and mystics do, where they can generate things without having to go through all those cascades of things. That people on a very mundane level, they have to deal with these cascades and assemblages and plans and schedules of how things go. But people on another level don't need to bother with that, like the yogis. They can just cause something to be generated, like Kardama, He didn't have to get a part-time job and go to Lowe's and make a blueprint, He just...
hire a
Right.
contractor.
He was just able, through his raw desire, coupled with his mystic potency and his acumen from having performed austerities, he was able to cause the material energy just to generate. And that's what Krishna is talking about in the Ishita, Vasita, Prakamya, Anima, Lagima, all these different various mystic powers are the ability to cause the material energy to do things without having to follow all these detailed and restrictive processes that most people have to do because they're all on the material level. So these restrictive processes of the material world are just the chains by which very material people are bound up.
So I think I should quote at least one verse. I didn't quote any verses. Ishvara sarvabhutanam hridesha arjuna tishtati brahmayan sarvabhutanam yantra rudhani mayaya. Yantra. All seated on machines, wandering.
So the seed grows into
And
a
it's
tree.
Krishna in our hearts that is directing.
Seed grows into a tree. It doesn't need anybody planting it, or it just needs some water and some dirt. That's all it needs. It does all the rest on its own.
Thank you. Haribol, Jai Shri Prabhupada, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.